All right, welcome back. I will look to our court reporter. Are you ready for us to go back on the record?
I'm here and ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll start with brief reorientation here. Welcome back. It is February 26, 2025 in the afternoon. I am Nicole Kinsey, presiding hearing officer for the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. We're reconvening this afternoon to pick up with cross-examination of witnesses in the hearing on the proposed Sites Reservoir project. And I believe for this afternoon, we have Mr. Goshi, who is a witness for the state water contractors. And before we begin with Mr. Goshi, is there anything else we should address before we get started? All right, great. Then I will look to my team. I think we have Ms. Mendel-Rice and we have Mr. Goshi. You can please spotlight us. And I will go ahead and administer the oath. Welcome and good afternoon, Mr. Goshi.
Hello, everyone.
And if you would please raise your right hand. Mr. Goshi, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And with that, Ms. Mendel-Rice, if you'd like to introduce the witness.
Thank you. Mr. Goshi, please state your first and last name for the record.
My name is Brandon Goshi.
Do you understand that you are testifying under oath today?
Yes.
Is SWC-1 a true and correct copy of your written rebuttal testimony?
Yes.
Did you prepare SWC-1? Is SWC-2 a true and correct copy of Metropolitan Water District's 2020 Integrated Water Resources Plan Regional Needs Assessment adopted April 12th, 2022?
Yes.
Please proceed with summarizing your written testimony.
All right. Great. So my name is Brandon Goshi. I am the interim group manager for water resource management for the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. I am responsible for planning and managing Metropolitan's imported and local water resource programs and regional storage programs for advancing water use efficiency and conservation, and providing research and analysis for regional water supply and demand planning. My qualifications are summarized in paragraphs 2 to 4 of my written testimony, and my testimony is to respond to the testimony provided by Jeffrey Michael in FOR-14 and Bruce Resnick, WCT-101. Do I go through? Okay.
You may continue.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about 4 different areas. The first area I'm going to talk about from my testimony concerns the need for sites water and really Metropolitan Water District's need for additional water supply. Dr. Michael's testimony states that sites water alone would exceed the need for water from the Metropolitan Water District service area and our customers. This is not correct and appears to be based on a fundamental misunderstanding of Metropolitan's planning and needs assessment. Metropolitan's 2020 Integrated Water Resources Plan is our comprehensive planning process for assessing long-term water reliability needs. The 2020 IRP approach is based on the fact that the future is uncertain because it is driven by a range of uncertainties in the underlying drivers that affect water supply and demand, not merely estimates of water supply and demand alone. To analyze the range of future uncertainty and potential needs for water supply reliability in projects, the 2020 IRP developed 4 scenarios to represent the range of potential supply and demand and the challenges thereof. Each of the 4 scenarios is plausible, and I want to emphasize that. Plausible meaning that it is in the realm of the uncertainties for that to occur, and none of the scenarios are more plausible or more likely than the other because it's essentially impossible to estimate the outcomes of the underlying drivers given their uncertainty and the combinations of those uncertainties. So in looking at this range of possible outcomes driven by these uncertainties. One of the scenarios, referred to as scenario D in both my testimony and the report, shows that if Southern California and our service area has future conditions of high population growth and economic prosperity, coupled with severe climate change and regulatory impacts to existing water supplies, both imported and local, Metropolitan would have a significant need to develop water supply to reliably meet that demand. The demographic and economic growth leads to higher demands, and the climate change and regulatory constraints lead to challenges to the existing supply base. In this scenario, 650,000 acre feet of new supplies would need to be built if we didn't also build storage capacity. Even if we build 500,000 acre feet of new storage capacity, we would still need an additional 500,000 acre feet of core supply to reliably meet demands in the long term in scenario D. Metropolitan's anticipated share of sites would make up a portion of what's needed that I just identified, but you can see that it's not enough on its own to meet that projected need, and we would still need to develop additional core supplies. So I think to conclude on this, there's a demonstrated need for water resources development, like Sites Reservoir, to meet water supply reliability needs in a future of a growing and thriving California and Southern California. The next area I want to talk about concerns water demands. Dr. Michael's written testimony states that Metropolitan's urban water demand is decreasing. Dr. Michael's statement that urban water demand is decreasing is misleading. And that's because, in my view, he's referring to per capita water use and not to total demands for water. Per capita water use is a good measure, trends in per capita water use is a good measure of water use efficiency. And certainly in Southern California, there has been an increase in water use efficiency as seen in that per capita water use trend. That's a direct result of the actions and investment in structural conservation on the part of Metropolitan and its member and local agencies. So while it's true that per capita water use trends are decreasing, that's certainly not an appropriate basis for concluding that demands, total demands, will continue to decrease out into the future. Further, it's important to differentiate between water use and demand at the retail level, the consumer level, versus water demands on Metropolitan. Metropolitan being a supplemental water supplier, demands for Metropolitan water by our agencies is a function of both the retail demand, end-use demand, and the local supplies that are provided by the local agencies. So the sustainability and reliability of those local supplies also play a key role in determining whether there would be a need for additional resources like sites. Our scenarios and analysis cover those ranges of risk to local supplies as well as the growth in demands to establish that need. So we use technical models and sources of information to determine both the retail level and demand on Metropolitan. Those inputs come from collaboration and information from both the member and local agencies, from recognized regional planning agencies like the Southern California Association of Governments, and experts in the field of demographics. The models also include the measures and trends of increased water use efficiency that I previously spoke about. So that increase in water use efficiency is incorporated into the demands, and we still see demands plausibly increasing out into the future. So demand for Metropolitan's water supplies in the future is dependent on the outcomes of growth in demographics primarily and the economy, and on local supply development and sustainability. So the plausible outcomes in each of those uncertainties show that it's very plausible that we'll see increased demand on Metropolitan in the future, and thus show a need for water resource development like sites. The next area I want to cover is on the notion that sites, investments in sites would crowd out other investments that Metropolitan might make. Again, referring to scenario D in the 2020 IRP, I think I previously spoke about the needs and how and why those would come about. The range of those needs, I think I covered in terms of the 300 to 600,000 acre feet of new core supplies that would need to be developed. That is well in excess of what sites is projected to be able to provide to the metropolitan share in this project. And so in the case of an outcome that resembles scenario D, the need that could be provided by sites alone would be exceeded, and we would need to consider other investments in water resources, not crowd them out, but consider them in conjunction with sites. We haven't made decisions on specific projects, even including sites. So it's premature to say that an investment in sites would crowd out other investments without having looked at those together at this point. I do want to add that water from sites would play a unique and important role in our water resources portfolio. And the reason for that is because the water from sites is sourced from the Delta watershed and would be moved to Southern California through the California State Water Project. Water that's delivered through the California State Water Project, because of our distribution system setup, can reach nearly all of our service area, our 6-county service area. However, there's a significant part of metropolitan service area that has roughly 6 million residents today that we refer to as the State Water Project dependent area. That area can only be served with water that comes from the Delta and through the State Water Project. In 2022, as recently as 2022, we had to place the State Water Project dependent area under an emergency water conservation plan, mandatory reductions in rationing, because of the extremely low State Water Project supplies and the multi-year dry period that depleted the storage resources that were developed that can reach that area. So sites would be able to augment the reliability of the supplies that can reach that area. Further, our other storage programs benefit from Delta water supplies. Diamond Valley Lake is Metropolitan's largest surface water reservoir located in Hemet, California. And it's a source of dry year water supply and emergency supply for metropolitan service area. At present, that reservoir can only be filled and refilled with Delta water and State Water Project supplies. And the reason why is because of the comparative water quality and invasive species concerns that are present in our other major source of water, the Colorado River. In short, Colorado River water is much more salty and has quagga mussels that pose a threat to our infrastructure if we allow it into our system. Anticipated water deliveries from sites wouldn't displace other local water strategies like groundwater recharge or recycled water project. It's actually the opposite. Sites water and State Water Project water helps to support those projects by increasing the reliability of high quality water from the Delta watershed. See, recycled water and groundwater recharge are subject to water quality and salinity requirements. And water from the Delta watershed is low in salinity and can meet the water quality requirements to keep those resources sustainable. In the case of the groundwater basins, recharge of water that exceeds salinity standards isn't allowed. So groundwater sustainability would suffer from not having access to lower salinity water supplies. So our analysis of future scenarios and needs show that sites water will likely be needed in combination with other investments, and that sites water can provide supplies that meet the needs of this of our State Water Project dependent area. And further, sites water can complement and support recycled water projects, groundwater and surface water storage due to the higher water quality and lower invasive species concerns relative to the Colorado River supplies. The last area I want to cover is on affordability. Both Dr. Michael and Mr. Resnick's testimony stated that sites will decrease affordability for MWD's ratepayers. I did not see any supporting evidence for that other than that statement. But I wanted to say that affordability is a clear and present concern in metropolitan service area today, and that will continue out into the future. However, those affordability concerns and challenges aren't unique to sites and the decision or investment in sites. In fact, sites may prove to help address those affordability concerns because it does appear to be cheaper than other options. Water supply and water development is not cheap or free. Other water supply projects are projected to come at a significant cost to metropolitan and our ratepayers, a higher cost than those estimates for sites. Even water conservation is not free, especially not the kind of sustainable structural conservation like turf replacement. As an example, Metropolitan's Pure Water Southern California project, which is a large-scale recycled water project, if developed, is estimated currently at $8.1 billion in 2023 dollars. On the conservation front, Metropolitan has spent nearly $1 billion, $900 million since 1990 on water fixture replacement, turf removal, and conservation messaging. Keep in mind, that's an incentive that was paid by Metropolitan. The full cost of these conservation programs was much more than that. So all water resource development is going to bring affordability challenges. That's not unique to sites, and sites may provide lower affordability challenges than other alternatives, as I just stated. Metropolitan is going to continue to balance those impacts to water supply reliability and affordability in any case going forward. That's part of our charge and part of our mission. That concludes my oral summary of my written testimony, and thank you for the time to present that to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Goshi. I will turn to the coordinating NGO parties. Is that Mr. Busher? Do you have questions for Mr. Goshi?
I do.
Please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Goshi. My name is Eric Busher. I'm the managing attorney at San Francisco Baykeeper, one of the protesting parties in this matter. It's good to meet you, and thank you for your time being here this afternoon.
Meet you too.
So before I jump into the written testimony, you mentioned during your presentation that MET has not yet made a decision about whether to ultimately participate in the Sites Reservoir project. Did I hear that correctly?
That's correct.
Do you know when that decision, yes or no, is expected?
I would within the next 2-year period. I can't be more specific than that. It's time to the sites authority decision making as well.
And at the end of your summary, you mentioned that you're trying to balance water supply and affordability and all of these other concerns. Is part of that balancing of supply and affordability what will drive MET's ultimate decision?
Certainly, that's part of the criteria that we look at making ultimate decisions on projects.
And as you sit here today, is there a cost, either total investment or per acre foot of water, that's like a threshold for MET that would cause it to determine that the project is no longer economically advisable?
No threshold exists for that. Projects are looked at on a information provided basis, and cost estimates and impacts to rates, et cetera, are done at the time of decision.
Thank you. If we could pull up Mr. Goshi's testimony or written testimony, SWC1, please, and go to the bottom of page 7. The footnotes there. So, Mr. Goshi, I just want to make sure that I'm on the same page. Footnotes 14, 15, and 16 are the definitions that Met uses in its IRP process for those three terms, correct?
At the high level assessment phase, yes.
Okay. And there's another term that's used in the IRP related to storage that is put/take. Can you
Mhm.
define what that is?
So storage facilities are generally described by total capacity, which is the amount of total capacity that they have to store water, usually in acre feet. And then the capacity or conveyance to move water in and out in a specified period of time. So you may have a storage facility that is, let's say, 100,000 acre feet of total capacity, with the put capacity or conveyance to store, say, deliver 20,000 acre feet in 1 year, and the take capacity to withdraw 30,000 acre feet in 1 year. And so that just helps us to describe how that storage facility would, could operate.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. In terms of the three supply categories that are defined in those footnotes, where does Met's portion of sites water fit?
Like I said, this is a high-level assessment view. And so it's likely that sites, depending on how it's operated and in terms of how we would receive the water and water supply from sites, could fill the needs or resemble the characteristics of either core supplies or storage supplies, depending on how it's operated. So just as an example, say, and I'm just say it was operated like a regulatory reservoir that then yielded 50,000 acre feet a year, and I'm just making up numbers. That 50,000 acre feet a year would resemble a core supply, in that it would be adding to our water supplies at a relatively constant rate year after year. If we operate that reservoir to take every year water that's available, store it, and then withdraw it and deliver it only in certain years where we have a specified need for augmented water supplies, then it would more resemble a storage supply and would operate that way.
Can it be both at the same time?
It can be, and I think I'd want to emphasize at this point that these are kind of analytical definitional terms, that the actual value of sites at the time of decision making will be analyzed for the benefits that it provides relative to the needs that are modeled in the scenarios that we're modeling. So it doesn't matter at that point, I guess, what you call it. All that will matter is the benefits that it provides from the way it's operating.
Fair enough. Thank you. And Met has, I don't know, I guess I'll say tentatively 50,000 acre feet of storage in sites. Is that correct?
I think our planning share is 25% of the total, and that's
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
25% of the total. I don't know what that is, and I don't think it applies in acre feet at this point.
Has there been a put take calculated for Met's share of sites?
Not that I'm familiar with.
All right. If we go back up to page 3 of Mr. Goshi's testimony. So for the 2020 IRP that you attached as SWC2, is that the current version of the IRP document?
Um, the IRP is really a planning process. So really, we had an inaugural planning process in 1996 that it finished in 1996, one in 2004, one in 2010, one in 2015, and one in 2020. So this is the latest, update or review of the long-term water resources strategy, and that was completed as it's stated here.
Do you know when the next update will be done?
Um, So we're currently involved in something that's called Camp for Water, which is the climate adaptation master planning process for water, where we're trying to incorporate additional looks at climate change and other uncertainties. And so I would imagine that upon the completion of the Camp for Water process, that we may have another IRP planning process following that.
I take it to be that is sometime in the future.
Yeah, sometime in the future. Yeah, sorry to be so vague. It's not currently scheduled, put it that way.
Perfect. And can we scroll down to paragraph 10, please? The second half of this paragraph identifies the 4 scenarios in the IRP that you described, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And if we go to the following page in paragraph 12 and 13, and as well during your testimony this morning, I hear you to emphasize that all of this is plausible. None of it is designed to be thought of as more likely than the other. Is that fair?
Correct.
Okay. And then in paragraph 12, you also note that there are many other plausible scenarios that could be considered. Can you just briefly describe what you mean to include there outside of those like 4 boxes in the scenarios above?
Yeah, for analytical practicability, we looked at kind of the ranges of the major drivers of uncertainty and boxed them into 4 scenarios that we think would encompass kind of the range of that uncertainty and plausibility. What I mean by that statement, other plausible scenarios that could be considered, is that the 4 scenarios shouldn't be viewed as definitive. Like these outcomes can only happen with each other. You're right. So, there is, if you consider even more uncertainties than the 4 that we explicitly considered, then you can have not infinite, but a very high amount of plausible scenarios.
Okay, thank you. And I think, could we put up State Water Contractors Exhibit 2 on the screen, the IRP document? And turn to page 18. And scroll down to the figure 3-1. Thank you very much. So I guess in terms of those other plausible scenarios, do they still kind of fall within this quadrant of boxes, just in various different combinations?
Yeah, I think that's the notion here, is that we've not encapsulated, but represented the different plausible ranges of the uncertainties.
Okay, and if we could scroll down then to the following page, page 19. And this is the descriptions, right? And again, really high level descriptions of the 4 scenarios, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and both scenarios, if we scroll down a little bit, well, let me ask this first. Am I generally understanding this correctly, that you're looking at various combinations of climate impacts, regulatory impacts, and economic/demographic impacts as to how those fit together in these 4 scenarios?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And if we could scroll down so we can see C and D, both of those are scenarios with severe climate change impacts, correct?
Correct.
And so scenario C, the last, I don't know, sentence, the last clause, I guess, describes climate change impacts affecting imported supplies more than less vulnerable local supplies.
Mhm.
Does Met believe that severe climate change impacts are likely to have a greater effect on imported supplies than local supplies? Or does this fall within the it's all plausible, don't assume anything is more likely than anything else bucket?
I think it's fair to say in this case that when we look at the immediate impacts, say on local water recycling, that local water recycling is less vulnerable to climate change impacts like increased temperature or changes in precipitation than a snowpack driven imported water supply like the State Water Project. So it's not necessarily imported versus local, although I've characterized it this way in this report, basically to achieve an understanding.
Thank you. And then one other, or a couple other questions on these scenarios. One of the things that you're factoring in this kind of jigsaw puzzle here is what's described in scenario A as a continuing water use ethic, or in scenarios B and D as a rebound in water use. Can you just briefly describe what that's meant to encompass?
I can. It's basically reflective of the time when this analysis took place. When this analysis took place in the circa 2019, 2020 time period, that was following the drought period of the 2015 to 2018, and we saw a decrease in overall water demand, primarily due to drought restrictions and mandatory conditions being placed upon, drought declaration, if you would, right? Governor's drought declaration, reduce your use by 20%. That those calls for conservation usually spark a behavioral change in water use that I can characterize here just generally, not specifically, but generally as somebody may flush their toilet every other time they use it. Somebody may water their grass less often or during night periods when there's less evapotranspiration. But they're doing that because of the situation that they're in, because of the drought declaration. So the two scenarios are trying to look at, even without restrictions, people may continue those behaviors. That's what we're trying to show in scenario A. The rebound scenario would be indicative of somebody saying, well, the drought's over, the emergency's over, I think I'll flush my toilet every time I use it. So that would result in a higher water use that we're characterizing as a rebound from the water use ethic, but that's really just a way of saying, a carrying forward of those behavioral conservation efforts.
And at least in the 2019-ish time period, there was some uncertainty about how that would play out in the future. Is there, do you have an updated opinion 5 years later as to whether people have continued those practices kind of on their own without being forced to, or whether there has been a rebound?
We have seen a rebound in water use, but you also have to discern the difference between that rebound in water use and the impacts of, say, hydrology and rainfall. Let me explain that for just a moment. A significant component of residential water use is outdoor landscape water use. If it's very hot and dry in a given time period, that resident will use more applied water to maintain that landscape. If it's raining and it's cool, the evapotranspiration requirements are less, and they'll have to water that. They will need to water that landscape less. So you see that in the water use. In wet years, you see a decrease in water use, and in dry years, you see an increase in water use. 2023, 2024 were extremely wet. And so some of the rebound of behavior is masked by that impact, or potentially masked by that impact. But I think overall, we have seen the underlying water use behavior rebound, not all the way towards previous levels, but towards more normal levels.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And then the last question on these four scenarios generally, am I correct in understanding that there's not a scenario here where there is high economic and demographic growth and what's described in scenario A as a continuing water use ethic?
There is, I think scenario B is that.
So I read scenario B, if we scroll up a little bit, as showing a rebound of water use on the second line.
Oh, no, that's correct. I'm sorry. I'm recalling my box the wrong way. Scenario Scenario C is more indicative of that lower demand trend. So the demands in scenario C generally resemble the demands in scenario A.
And those are the two with low economic and
Right.
demographic growth.
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, so A and C are generally lower growth, lower demands, and the difference between the two is the severeness of the climate change assumption and the regulatory impacts.
Okay, but to go back to where I started, right?
Yeah.
There's no scenario that shows continued conservation conduct and higher economic and demographic growth in this table. It's one of the other ones that is potentially plausible, just not detailed.
Yeah, and I'm saying that I believe scenario C, in that it's comparable in demand level to scenario A, is essentially that scenario.
So scenario C shows lower economic and demographic growth, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And it also shows, well, and scenario A shows lower economic and demographic growth, correct? Okay. And so for those two, they don't show higher growth.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then for scenario B, which shows higher growth, it also shows a rebound of water use, correct?
Right. And so that it's like the rate in which people use water and having more people leads to a higher water use.
Correct. So
Right.
my question, so maybe let's try it this way. Is there any scenario where the rate at which people use water and the rate at which, like, the number of people there, the economic or demographic growth, point in opposite directions?
I suppose not. I think in so much as scenario A and C resemble each other, and scenario B and D resemble each other in terms of demand levels, then there wouldn't be.
Okay, thank you. Can we scroll down to page 23 of this document, please? And look at figure 3-3. This is described as total local supply under average conditions for each of the four scenarios, correct?
Correct.
And like you mentioned earlier, this includes historical data through 2019, maybe 2020, correct?
Yes.
Can you describe what average conditions means in the context of the four different scenarios?
Yes. So it's generally described under average or normal weather conditions. And that, primarily makes a difference for supplies like the Los Angeles Aqueduct, which is considered a local supply even though it's imported, or groundwater basin production and yield can be impacted by the type of weather that's being occurring on a year-to-year basis. Um, these are representative of the 4 scenarios under those kind of normal weather conditions. In the analysis itself, there's roughly 100 different outcomes of those local supplies for each one of those lines, but we chose not to put that on the graphic.
Um, are the normal weather conditions different between, for example, scenario A and scenario D?
Yes,
Okay.
because they have the climate change embedded into it. So it's normal. Okay, that was a great question. I never really thought about it that way. It's normal or average for that climate change outcome out into the future. So average temperatures are going to be higher in the scenarios with more severe climate change. So, yeah.
Are the local water supply actions taken between 2020 and 2045 the same across the 4 scenarios?
No.
And how much of the difference in outcomes between the 4 scenarios is because of different local water supply actions as opposed to different average conditions?
Uh, hmm. I don't have an exact number. They're both components, though. As an example, um, the higher economic growth or higher economic outcome scenarios, so that's scenario D and scenario B, have higher local supply production and implementation. And that was done in interaction with our member and local agency staffs. And basically, the underlying principle there was that the better the economy, the more funding that local agencies would have and be more likely to implement projects that they've identified because they could afford it.
So it's just harder in scenario C, for example, to implement the same
Yes.
local water supply infrastructure actions as you can in the high economic growth scenarios. Okay. Has Met continued to collect data on local supply as reflected here since 2020?
We do a comprehensive survey every year.
Can you give me a sense of where the blue line goes between 2020 and 2025?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Do you know if it materially deviates from what the 4 scenarios show on here?
Yeah, not in that near term because they're all relatively close to each other. Um, I think that's a good representation of where those actuals came in.
Okay, so I appreciate you don't know the exact answer, but you wouldn't expect to go find the answer and have it show 2.5 million acre feet, for example.
Yeah.
Okay. And then there's a kind of uniform bump, it looks like, in 2025. Can you explain what that?
That would be the implementation of a newly identified project that's common to all 4 scenarios. So I don't know what specific project it was in this assumption, but given the similarity in the slope and the timing, it would have to be the implementation of, say, a local recycled water project that's common in all 4 of the scenarios.
Okay. Can we scroll down to figure 3-4, please, on the following page? So the same questions, I guess, with respect to the last 5 years in the blue line. Do you know what the total demand on Met has been approximately between 2020 and 2025 if it were plotted here?
Yeah, it's on the lower side, so it's 1.4, I believe, to last year was 1.2 million acre feet. I'd want to emphasize here, though, that again, the demands on Metropolitan are a combination of retail water use levels and local supply availability. So it's, I think generally speaking, it's low because of a higher local supply. At least, let me give you an example. 2023 and 2024 had wet conditions in the Los Angeles Aqueduct watershed in the Eastern Sierras. And so they delivered, I believe, somewhere around 300 to 350,000 acre feet in those years, where their average normal year deliveries is probably a little south of 200,000. So, just that change alone equates to, 200,000 acre feet of changes into demands on Metropolitan.
Okay, so that's helpful. So I think I take that to mean figure 3-4 includes the data in figure 3-3 plus the water, the consumptive use, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And that's true for, well, is it correct that that is a scenario to scenario addition? So like the purple line here for scenario A includes scenario A from 3-3 plus the predicted use of water or demand for water. Okay. Thank you.
And I just would reiterate that for each year, there's, I think it's 96 outcomes of different weather outcomes. This is just a representation of the average or normal condition.
The same as figure 3-3.
Correct.
Thank you. And then if we could go to page 26, please, and look at figure 3-5. Do I read this figure correctly in that the demand on Met would decrease or be relatively equal through 2045 in scenarios A and C?
Yes.
And the opposite is true in scenarios B and D?
The opposite. I'm not sure I understood that.
The demand on Met would increase in scenarios B and D?
Yeah. So this is retail demand, and these graphics are trying to capture the concept that we were just talking about before. In each one of the scenarios, you'll see that the retail demand estimates out through the forecast horizon, projection horizon, are very similar in A and C. Those are the lower growth scenarios in terms of demands, and very similar in B and D, which are the higher growth scenarios in retail demand. So that's how they should line up.
Right. Is it correct that the relative utility of participation in sites reservoir for Met is very different in scenarios A and C than it is in B and D?
Yeah, that's fair to say.
All right. I think that's all the questions I have about this document. If we go back to Mr. Goshi's testimony and look at page 4, I've just got a few questions left about the rest of this. Paragraph 14, please. This is, I think, Mr. Miller's testimony that's on the screen.
It is. We want SWC 1, please.
Thank you very much. So paragraph 14,
Mhm.
I understand, I just want to clarify the scope of your opinion or disagreement with Dr. Michaels or Dr.
Mhm.
Michael. I understand your point to be that his statement is based on only scenario C, and that's not how we approach this. You have to consider scenarios A through D, and maybe even some of the other plausible outcomes that aren't plotted on that, that aren't laid out in that report. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
Do you disagree with his statement if we were in scenario C world?
No, I don't disagree with his statement.
Okay, thank you. And then in paragraph 15, you say the board voted to plan to a scenario that represents the most extreme climate impacted future. And then in the Camp 4 process, took a bunch of actions that are consistent with scenario D. Was that decision like okay, we've used the scenarios and now we're going to move on just with scenario D for our planning process in the future?
I think it was reiterating to staff that we need to continue to analyze and look at planning for more the edges of that uncertainty, the more extreme, impactful cases for the purposes of planning.
And am I correct in understanding that scenario C also included severe climate change impacts?
Correct.
And is that also part of what the board has instructed staff to take into account or to plan toward?
Have not directed us to plan for a specific scenario. The direction here was to make sure that we included the severe climate change impacts, and scenarios C and D both include those. And so we're continuing to provide information for what would it take to provide a reliable water supply under scenario C and scenario D.
And then if we could go down to page 8, paragraph 26. I just got a couple questions here. I think I will be done. You say Diamond Valley Lake is the largest surface water reservoir, or is Met's largest surface water reservoir. What portion or percentage of total surface water storage for Met is in Diamond Valley Lake?
Total percentage. Well, that's so let me just start with kind of the capacity of Diamond Valley Lake is 800,000 acre feet. Actually, a little bit more than that, 805,000 acre feet of total storage capacity. That to compare that to some of the other surface reservoirs in Southern California, I think Castaic Lake, which is one of the terminal reservoirs on the State Water Project, is about 350,000 acre feet. Lake Paris is something around 100,000 acre feet. So this is just to say that Diamond Valley is significantly large, and certainly the largest of the metropolitan-owned surface water reservoirs that we have.
So let me actually try that differently. How many surface water reservoirs does Met own, or in that sense?
So I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. Just as again as an example, Lake Matthews, which is also in Riverside County, is 130,000 acre feet. Lake Skinner, so these are surface reservoirs that we have. I think Lake Skinner is 44,000 acre feet.
So fair to say that Diamond Valley is maybe half or more of the total surface water storage that Met owns, right? For the reservoirs that Met owns.
And certainly in our service area, sure.
Correct. Okay. Sorry, I was trying to limit my question there.
I want to try to give you an accurate answer to where you're going.
Yeah. Are there any other reservoirs that Met owns in this context, where this same restriction about Colorado River water due to the mussel applies?
Yeah, we have the same restrictions on Lake Skinner. We don't have the same restrictions on Lake Matthews. Lake Matthews is the terminal reservoir of the Colorado River, and so the system is set up that that has to take Colorado River water.
Okay. And other than like Skinner, do you know if there are any others that can only be filled with Delta water due to this reason?
Um, I would say that's the three. The other surface water reservoirs we use contractually, like Castaic Lake or Lake Paris. So the Department of Water Resources operates that. They can only get Delta water and state water project water, but that's a matter of it being owned and operated by the state.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gosha. I appreciate your time. I don't have any further questions for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Busher. Is there any other representative from the coordinating NGO parties who has questions for Mr. Goshi? Mr. Reese, I see you're off mute. Do you have questions for Mr. Goshi?
I do not have questions. I'm not sure if Ms. Meserve does.
Ms. Meserve?
No, thank you.
Is there anyone else on the line who has questions for Mr. Goshi? I have a question, not for Mr. Goshi, but possibly for Mr. Hitchings about this. So this is, I know this is coming out a little bit out of the blue, but we had this discussion about Diamond Valley Lake. I didn't see, I mean, my understanding, so let me back up. I didn't see Diamond Valley Lake identified as anywhere in the application for the site's, the water right application. And I just wanted to know from your perspective, if you know, whether the intent was to allow for the transfer of site's water, the site's water through the California Aqueduct, and then ultimately possibly to storage in Diamond Valley Lake. Is that intended?
You're right. This is coming a little bit out of the blue.
I mean, it is. The only reason Diamond Valley Lake happens to be in the testimony, which is why the question came to mind. You're welcome to say, let me get back to you on that.
Yeah, I think we can get back to you in short order on that. I'd like to talk to Ms. Bizzoni, who was the primary person behind our points of rediversion as well as place of use aspects of the application. So we can do that. And honestly, I'm not as familiar with the intricacies of the plumbing down there, and maybe Mr. Goshi is able to just explain that there's no interconnection, and that's why. I'm not sure.
And that might be it. So, okay, so that was going to be my next question, and maybe I should have asked that first. But Mr. Goshi, is it your understanding that one possibility of Met's participation in the Sites Reservoir project is that water diverted under the project could be stored in Diamond Valley Lake? Assuming that the project is the water right application is granted and Metropolitan decides to participate in the project. Is that a yes?
Yes, that's a yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to get on the record. Okay, that's helpful. So there's a connection. I mean, the plumbing is there in theory or to connect the aqueduct to the lake.
Yeah, and just in thinking through your question, in regard to maybe place of use, a place of use question, it's our service area would be, we'd be taking delivery of the water, and Diamond Valley Lake is part of our overall system, distribution and storage, to deliver water to our described customer outcomes. So I guess I just assumed that was the case.
That's fair enough. I know your testimony focused on a different issue. With that, I don't have any other questions. So Ms. Mendel-Rice, do you have any redirect for Mr. Goshi?
I do not. Thank you.
Then with that, thank you so much, Mr. Goshi, for joining us. I really appreciate your testimony today, and you are excused.
All right. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. I believe that's all we have on our agenda for today. The intent would be to break for today and then reconvene next week. Again, I will not be with you, but Hearing Officer Bivens will be conducting the proceeding the 4th, 5th, and 6th. And I think we laid out the general order of go, if you will, for the 4th, 5th, and 6th. I will certainly be reviewing the testimony, and I intend to be up to speed when we are back together again on March 10th. But before we step aside, it looks like Mr. Busher, do you have a question or a comment?
I have one update. I think we're going to have to switch the order of two of our witnesses, and we would swap Mr. Smallwood and Mr. Asarian. And as soon as I have that confirmed, somebody in our group will send an email to the service list, but that happened since we last spoke this morning on this subject, so I wanted to pass that along.
Understood.
I
Thank
have
you.
one separate question, but I can wait until we're done with everything else.
I think now is the time.
That was the time. I didn't know if the authority was going to provide transcripts from the rebuttal phase, or I'm sorry, the ITP phase of the hearing, or if those had been uploaded yet. And just wanted to ask if or when that was going to occur.
Yes, I believe they've been uploaded. They've been provided to the HO
Okay.
office, so I believe they're uploaded.
And I was going to say the same thing. I believe they're uploaded, although I haven't personally checked, but I saw we had some internal traffic to that effect. So I think they're there, but if they're not, please let us know and we will look into that.
Thank you very much.
They had been uploaded.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Is there anything else that we need to address before we adjourn for the week? All right, then. Thank you very much. And I will see you the following week. And we are adjourned for today. Thank you.
Thank you.